welcome to Understanding the IAR Math Assessment. This is for 3rd through 8th grade teachers. And my name is Kelly Remijan. I am one of the ICTM Director-at-Large positions. The ICTM is a fully volunteer organization made up of teachers, coaches. We also have college professors that are here, part of this organization. And in addition to that position that I hold again as a volunteer position, I'm also a director of STEM initiatives for the Regional Office of Education number 40. And prior to that, I was in the classroom for 23 years teaching math, primarily at the high school level, but also did some instructional coaching with grant work, also K-12. So before we get started, I want to first of all thank ISBE for helping with some of the questions that we had to help put this presentation together. Also, all of the tremendous resources that ISBE has online that I'll be talking about today. In particular, I like to thank Heather Colwell, who's online here. She's the ISBE Math Content Specialist, who is very much involved with IAR. So I'm super excited to have her today to be able to answer questions. Also, special thanks to Laura Quimby, who is ISBE Assessment Supervisor, and also Illinois Council of Teachers with Mathematics. Again, Adam Petzel, former ICTM president, and he's currently our ICTM webmaster. So I'm going to thank him, Adam, again, helping me with the chat box. So we're going to go through kind of talking about tips for teachers. And the first thing is tips for teachers is educating the students on the format of the test. So we're really going to talk a lot about that. And also utilizing the various resources that ISBE has and encouraging teachers to engage students in similarly worded problems. And those problems can be found with these different sources that I'm going to go through. Again, you're going to have a PDF of this whole entire presentation. Also, tips for teachers share test-taking strategies and implement ways to get your students to put forth their best effort. So these are some things we're going to talk about. Also, giving teachers, educators the opportunity to share their input also today, because you all have input too, and we need to collaborate and make sure we're sharing that information. So the IAR math assessment is for grades 3 through 8. It will be starting earliest here coming up in March. And on this particular slide, which again, everything that I have, you'll have the link to, so you'll know where I'm getting that information, that you'll be able to simply click on that link. Heather notes that even though this talks about online and paper, the schools are expected to use the online version of the IAR unless there's special circumstances. And of course, students with paper accommodations are allowed. Heather can talk more about that as we go through this process, but that's something to keep in mind as we go through and look at examples of problems and such. So the IAR math assessment is for grades 3 through 8. And with grades 3 through 5, all parts, there's 3 sections, and each section is no calculator. And so again, 3 through 5, no calculator. But when you get into 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, those sections are split. Basically, the first section is either no calculator with 8th grade, or that first section is split into the first part is no calculator, and then the second part is with calculator. So again, I'll be showing you examples of what those problems look like, but keeping that in mind, 3 different sections, a total time of 180 minutes. Again, notes from Heather, with the multiple choice items, there's always going to be 4 options for those multiple choice items. However, some problems will have multi-select items and will have more than 4 options for the students to consider. Now in grades 3 through 5, the students will be told how many answers to choose. But in grades 6 through 8, they'll see phrases such as select all that apply, and they will not be told how many options to choose. So there's definitely between 3 and 5 and 6 and 8, there is a difference there that we need to keep in mind. So at this time, I'm going to ask Adam here to help me out. If you could go to the ISBE site, isbe.net/IAR, that is where all of the resources that ISBE has for the IAR is going to be found. And again, starting back, IAR is the Illinois Assessment of Readiness. So everything that I'm going to primarily talk about is going to be found here. Okay, so everything's going to be there. And so you can click on it. If you have two computers, two screens, you could be looking at things as I'm talking, however you desire. But when you go to that IAR site, if you scroll down, you're going to go to Test Information and Resources. And that particular blue rectangle that you see, when you click on it and scroll down, you're going to go to Test Preparation. And Test Preparation, the first thing you're going to see is Digital Library. And the Digital Library is going to offer you a lot of different problems that you can use. So this is helping students to understand if we're able to incorporate problems from this digital library, they're seeing the same kind of terminology, the same kind of format, so that when it comes to the IAR, they are familiar with things, how they're worded. And I think that's really, really important because students may know something, but if it's presented in a different way than they're familiar to, that may then kind of take them off of the right direction. So this digital library, when you go to the IAR digital item library, you want to make sure you select math because there's also ELA, and then you're going to select your grade level. So I'm just doing an example of grade 6. So when you do this, I want to point out again, some of these tests, you'll see that they were released several years ago, but the problems are good to practice. And when you look at, you'll see the content standard, you'll see an item identifier, and you'll see an item type. The item type is going to be either 3, 2, or 1. And so I'll talk a little bit about that, but that actually means something. And of course, you'll again see the domain right next to that. But when you click on a certain content, for instance, before it was at type 3, but you'll also see some within one content area might be type 2 or type 1. So going here, I just picked on one particular problem, an example. And so this example is a type 1 problem. This particular type 1 problem has students only entering their answer. So they're going to type in the answer. And again, I would encourage you to try these problems on your own. You could have students do it. Another thing you could do is actually, screenshot, and you could create Google quizzes that have these as well if you wanted to do that to give students certain problems. But this again is an example of a type 1 problem, just entering in the answer. And this is something that students might be familiar. They just give an answer for something. That might be something they're more accustomed to. But when you get to a problem like this is a type 2 problem, type 2 now is not just an answer, but it's basically 3 different parts to it. And the students have to make sure that they address all 3 bullets in their response. And so making sure that they do that is important. So it's not just an answer, but they're identifying, they're determining which of those expressions are equivalent, and then they're explaining or showing their process. And so I think as teachers, those are some things that we can definitely make those changes possibly with problems that we're currently doing, just showing those expectations of what we're wanting students to do in our regular everyday problems just so they're familiar with doing these kinds of things. And also, since the test is online, I know as a math teacher, I didn't do Google quizzes, but those are some things that I could definitely make changes for. And again, please, Heather, feel free to interject at any time. I know there's different parts I'll get to that will kind of talk more about the drag and drop and such there. But please check out also the chat as we're going through, because there's lots of good information that'll be shared. So this is a type 1 problem now. And this is a multiple choice answer. The bottom of the problem, when it's multiple choice, you're going to see that you can select correct response. And so when you do that, it'll actually show you what the answer is. So again, you could have the students do this, or again, create your own quizzes from these problems, but you have the answers to the multiple choice problems. So again, there's one answer here. However, there's also multiple choice problems where there would be more than one answer. So this is an example of a type 1 problem. It's multiple choice, but there's more than one answer, and they do in fact have to select each one. So if they just select one of them, then they don't get the point. And so making sure we give that. Again, this is 6th grade, so it doesn't say how many choices there are. And so that could be tricky for students, but giving those opportunities for students to practice those problems. So again, correct response. When it's multiple choice in the digital library, you will have access to that answer right there, and I think it's really convenient for you. This is just another example, a type 3 problem. So this is a rectangular prism where you have a fish tank. And again, I know as a teacher, we might just have them set up the equation and find the volume. But what type 3 problems are, it's definitely more than one part. This part A has 3 bullets. So students have to address those 3 bullets. Then there's a part B, and they also have to address those 3 bullets. And so simply having students not just find, but explain. And you'll notice the dimensions are in feet and inches, and having them, again, it kind of walks them through. This is what you need to do first. Having our problems and warm-ups or homework problems, quizzes, having these kinds of problems so they're familiar with that, the wording and the format is really, really important. So again, that is digital library, which is under test preparation for the IAR resources. So now under test preparation, we have practice test items. And so the practice test items, this is actually going to be like a practice test. So when you go to, again, you click right there on practice test. And once you click on practice test items, it's going to take you to the My Pearson support page. Make sure you click math, because this is also a support page for ELA and math. So a lot of times people just click on ELA and they get messed up. So you got to make sure you scroll over to mathematics. So here again, you're going to select your grade for mathematics. And it gives you a student readiness tool. I personally don't find the student readiness tool very helpful, but you can, I know some teachers utilize that. What I find helpful is this actual practice test. And so once you have your grade that you want, you're going to click it. So I'm going to pick grade 6. And so when you click grade 6, you're going to click computer-based practice items. I picked non-screen reader. That way the students have to read it themselves and they can go through the process of answering those questions. So this is going to give students that familiarity of how to work through TestNav. And so doing this, they can just enter their name, It tells them that it's, how many questions that there are, whether there's calculator or no calculator. And so again, it tells you, and it also reminds students that you need to show your work or explain your work to receive full credit. So again, I like that they show that information there. So again, some of these problems are boom, just give your answer and then go up here where there's an arrow, you click it and you move on. So this is problem one of this practice test. This is no calculator. Practice problem two is multiple choice. So you could click it and you can move on. Again, the arrow is up here. However, if you get to a problem that may not just be multiple choice or it's a quick answer, encourage your students to use scratch paper. They should work out that problem and they should always answer every single problem. Every single problem. They should not skip a problem. However, if there's a problem that they're not sure about, they should answer it and they should then bookmark it. They should never leave anything blank. Bookmarking it will help them to know what they need to go back to later. And it comes up very clearly at the end as to what they might have skipped or what they might have bookmarked. So again, the answer is all they're asking for. However, the students really should be working those problems on a piece of paper to help them so they can see things more clearly. So at the end of that unit, this is what it may look like. So if a student did not answer a question, it will be marked with a yellow dot. And if it's a problem they want it to come back to, encourage them again. If they're not sure, they can go back and look. They can go back and they can review. Up here, they can go back and review those problems. But when they're ready, they've gone through and they've reviewed it, they've worked those problems, they're then going to click submit to move on. This is still unit one, and this particular problem is with calculator. And again, you'll see there's 3 bullets. In this space, they have to enter the answer. So the answer here is not just a number, though. They really have to address each bullet. That is considered to be the answer here. And so addressing. Again, if students aren't used to typing, that I will say would have not been one that could type. So giving students an opportunity to type would be helpful. Giving them the practice. Again, online is great for in some aspects, but it's challenging in terms of typing. And also, if there are pictures, they need to draw the pictures on a piece of paper, have it kind of organized in their work. But on those pictures, if it was a paper test, they could just mark the pictures, but now they got to put it on their paper. So that takes more time as well. And so having them do those things. And you can see here, there actually is a built-in calculator. Heather, can you touch base on calculators regarding the IAR?
Sure. Any item that requires a calculator will have a calculator icon pop up at the top there that students can use. So the items that are not calculator allowable, then there won't be one there. I know some students prefer to use a handheld calculator when they're used to using, and that is okay. There's guidance online as far as what kind of calculator, 6-function, or if it can be scientific in 8th grade, what kind of calculator they can use, and that's fine. They can use their own handheld calculator for the calculator sections. It'd just be up to the proctor to make sure that they're not using their calculator in a section where they're not allowed. Once they get to that point where they can use a calculator, then they can raise their hand and get their calculators out. So, but there's no need to purchase calculators or give them one because there's one already embedded into the platform.
In terms of calculators, again, whatever calculator is allowed, if they've been using that calculator all year long, I would hope they've been using a calculator that is allowed. So making sure that they're familiar with their calculator to use it, or using that built-in calculator. So again, this is what the end of unit 1 looks like with calculator. And then moving on, unit 2, again, this is just more examples that I encourage you to do this practice test. And again, this is grade 6. You can go and pick your particular grade and go through that practice test. So again, encourage you to go back and look at those things. Trying these problems yourself for time's sakes to make sure we get through questions and such. Make sure you practice this and have your students practice those tests as well. There is a paper practice test. You could take those, make them into Google quizzes, or just give them the practice test. The answer key is there as well. The answer key for this practice test actually does correspond to the computer-based one as well, as what I found. So this is, again, you'll see this is the paper test. It's the same questions that were on the online test. Finishing up. And then this is what the answer key looks like. When it was a number, it just says student response 7.5. You'll see the letters for the multiple choice. But what I want to highlight here are the problems that have a rubric. And as a teacher, I would encourage you to look at the rubrics and practice. I mean, that seems silly, but practice grading how the rubric is used on student problems. It could just be, one problem. Maybe that's an exit ticket one day that they can do. And then you can see what they're doing and what improvements could be made in class as you go through. I don't want to say we're teaching to the test, but we have to know what the test looks like. We do, to be able to prepare the students, the terminology, the expectations, the format, the rubric. And if we're aware of that, then we can start integrating those kinds of rubric formations in our problems. You'll see here an example of a rubric, the score being 3, 2, 1, or 0. But go through and look at these and see how they go about giving 3 points. And if they're missing one of those 3 points, then it's 2, and so on. But making sure, and again, those bullets, I believe, have been put in to really kind of help address what it is the students are supposed to have in their answers. Released items are another great resource of problems. These, again, are dated, but they still provide great examples. Released items, again, you want to select math, and then you can select your grade or your topic. And in addition to the problems, it gives an answer key, and it gives more rubrics. Again, those rubrics are so helpful for us teachers. Give them a problem, and if it's one that's not just an answer, but an explanation, reasoning, work, you can see what those expectations are. And these are just some more examples of rubrics with links that you could go to and practice. Test design. So I kind of showed you what the test kind of looks like. This test design kind of gets into the scoring expectations. And I think Heather might be able to talk a little bit more about this. But when you go to, again, this is test design, and then scroll down to IAR math test scoring expectations. If you click on that, it's talking about some of the things that are expected. Read each question carefully, follow the directions, answer each part. Some of the things I've already talked about, but obviously it's highlighted. If there's tables or charts, look at those. But also here, under general expectations, they talk about, and maybe Heather could talk about this, now there are drawing tools embedded into the IAR. And so students can use these drawing tools to help, explain or visualize, but it is not required, correct, Heather? It's not required here.
Correct. Yes. No, the drawing tool is something new that we've just started putting as accompanying piece to some of the items that lend themselves to a drawing, perhaps, as opposed to words. Sometimes it's hard to explain how you use a number line to do something, but if you give them a number line, the students can show the jump. They can explain it with an illustration better than they can in words. So for items like that, we've started including this drawing toolbox. You can see on kind of in the middle of your screen here, but there's not very many functions. You get a line, you get an eraser. I think there's maybe 2 colors. They don't give them very many because we obviously don't want the kids to spend all their time coloring a picture. They need to use their time on the test. So there's limited options there for them, but they have a few ways that they can sketch their thinking if they want. We found it very useful in the items where, for example, in the upper grades, you have to do a transformation on a coordinate plane. So in the drawing box, you'll see the coordinate plane with the original pre-image already on there for the students. So then they can just go ahead and sketch their graphs rather than trying to explain how they did a transformation in words. So it's just an optional tool they can use for the students who find it helpful. This year, we're field testing a lot of items that have the drawing box, and we're just going to kind of see how it affects their scores. We're hoping it's going to do better, but if the student does not want to use the drawing tool, they do not have to. It's completely optional.
Language matching just talks about here that if taking the English test version, the answers can be in English. And if they're taking the Spanish version, that the answers could be written in, the students could be writing it in English or Spanish. I think that's a new thing also. Explaining and modeling the responses. This is a great tool that kind of talks about those. I know in terms of avoiding run-on equations, I will say that I see a lot. I just want to highlight one thing in particular. Run-on equations, I see a lot that students do. And so that's not something that we want to make sure that we're highlighting, not having students do that. But if they're always used to doing that, and if they're allowed to do that, then they're going to think that's okay. So that's something it's saying here, making sure students avoid those run-on equations. And so you can take a look here at these different components of expectations. Also with test design, right, kind of you scroll down, we have a high-level blueprint, and this kind of goes back and kind of talks about how many items there are. I like this, so you could, and it varies, Heather, correctly? I mean, could the test vary from one person to another? Like how many problems? Correct me if I'm wrong there.
It will, only because different students are going to have different field test items that are embedded in there, and some might have, maybe they're field testing one of the 6-point items, so they're not going to get as many. But as far as the scoreable items that go towards their score, they'll be the same.
So grade 3 here, there would be 27 type 1 problems. And you can kind of see when it's 1 point, it's just answer, put it in and move on. If it's 2 points, it's really, there's 2 parts to it. So there's probably an answer and maybe show an equation, maybe explain, but 2 points. And then there's 3 type 2 problems. So you can see here, one point or one problem might be worth 3 points. One problem might be worth 4 points, and so on. And so this kind of breaks it down by grade level. And then over here, you'll see what type 1, type 2, type 3 problems look like. But I tried to give you some examples earlier of what you might see in type 1, type 2, and type 3. One more thing, this is also new this year, and very excited. Heather is actually a part of why this is here. Another thing that teachers can do to get problems or ideas for problems is to look at these new performance level descriptors. And this again is in that same where all those rectangles are. When you go to that, you're going to scroll down to where it says performance level descriptors, and you're going to pick your grade. So again, grades 3 through 8, but you are going to want to select samples to success. So I'm going to pick grade 3 samples to success. And when you pick that particular grade, samples to success, what Heather and her team have created for mathematics is they have, which is, I think it makes it very simple. They have the expectation, they have like what the topic is, and then they have 4 levels. They have different problems of different levels. So below proficient, approaching proficient, and above proficient. And so these again are great problems to use to give students practice. And so again, what this is, again, grade 3, this is number and operations in base 10. You can see 4 variations of that topic. You can be using these samples to success as examples and practice problems. Number and operations are there. You can see what the expectation is and the different levels that are there.
Kelly, if I can interrupt just a second. For these PLDs, the samples to success document, it's kind of important to point out that all of the items on the IAR are written to the proficiency level because it's not a formative assessment, it's a summative assessment for accountability purposes, every item is written to the proficiency category. So proficient is where, when we had the educators write the PLDs, they started with the proficient and then they worked their way down and then up to the above. Only because sometimes it's nice to see what your students can do. Maybe they're not proficient, right? Maybe they only know some of the knowledge that hits that evidence statement. And it's kind of nice to see what that below approaching, how you can get your kids to progress to where they are in that proficiency, because that's kind of the target. Because some of the items on the IAR, we have to have a nice broad range of complexity levels. Some of the items might dip down a little bit into like that approaching proficient, just because we need to get some more basic items, but all of them are supposed to be written at the proficiency level. So you won't see any items like what you're going to see here for below proficient. You're not going to see any items like you see here for above proficient. That's not what the IAR is about. That's stuff that you might see in your classroom. So the performance level descriptors are written more for the classroom level, not specifically for the IAR, but we've tried to pick out the evidence statements that are aligned to the IAR and how that would look, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. Thank you. Geometry. And so again, I would encourage you to take some time to explore your grade level, looking at those variations and incorporating those at the proficient level, but also taking it a step up above proficient, what that looks like. Because if we can see what the students know beyond, then that's a good thing. I'm showing a lot of ISBE resources, but I'm curious because I know of some schools that use other tools that they're using to help students prepare for the IAR. So I think it would be helpful if you use resources for practice problems, for practice tests, outside of those available via ISBE, if you would be willing just to share those in the chat box. Other things, test taking strategies. I would encourage you, if you have some test taking strategies that you teach your students, that you highlight for your students to help them to do better. What are your test taking strategies? Some test taking strategies that I would share that may seem very basic, that was addressed. Some of them were addressed already by the expectations. Reading the question carefully. Sometimes it's a matter of units, not reading it carefully. Answer every problem. So students should not be skipping any problems. Wear or bring a watch. Keep track of time. Online now, online, Heather, it does show timing. Does it show timing on the test, on how much time they have? Because the practice test I didn't see had timing.
I do not believe so.
Okay.
I don't think there's a clock in the corner that counts down or anything, no.
Okay. So that's what I want to make sure that people encourage them wear watches. Encouraging kids, though, to use a watch, to use something on their possession so they can monitor their time. Having students draw pictures, either on the computer. I'm kind of old school. I like to draw pictures if I can on my own paper. Mark pictures. Work problems on paper. Also, you can then put information into your box and explain things. And bookmark problems on the computer to come back to. Those are things that I would encourage for students to take the test and to do their very best. Another thing, talking about having students do their very best. A question sometimes I get is, what do you do to get students to put forth their best effort? And some of the quotes here I'm going to share, this was on ISBE did a presentation, so these are quotes right off of an ISBE presentation that you can be able to click to. One school did a pep rally every year to kick off the IAR. They pick a theme. They have treats before testing and so on. That's something one school does. Another school encourages students they show them their previous year scores. They get a movie reward. These are just ideas, but I think it's important to think about, brainstorm, what can we do to encourage our students to do the best effort. One more thing, pointing out that this is something I did not know about that might be helpful, and maybe this is something that's going to build on, but you can actually earn more PD hours by watching videos. The ISBE website, the IAR website, where it says IAR trainings and resources. Through Pearson's learning management system, you can create an account. And when you do that, you'll see a page that looks like this, and you're going to click on catalog. And this site gives you different videos that you can watch. Every 15 minutes that you watch a video, you get 0.25 PD credits. And I'm all about if I can share ways to get credit because we all do stuff. So we might as well get some credit if we're doing something. So this is one thing that it doesn't have a whole lot yet. Hopefully it will maybe in the future, but there is a few here that I found that were helpful videos that you can go back and look at. Assessment literacy to inform teaching and learning. Another video was exercising assessment literacy in math. This is more of the after the fact, which I think is something that's beneficial that could help in the future on what you could focus on in terms of instruction to help students, next year students on certain topics. And so again, this information was shared to me via Laura Quimby through ISBE's partnership with Pearson. And you can take a look at this. I will say I did 2 videos and I still haven't got my credit. It looks like it takes 5 to 6 weeks for that credit to appear ultimately because ISBE's entering it in manually. So hopefully that'll improve in the future. But you can get some PD credit that way. And if you want more information, Rob Patempa is the person that you would contact regarding information with those videos. So we have questions.
Yeah, sure. Heather, I guess there was a little conversation, some answers were given, but if you could talk a little more about the expectation for showing work or explaining in sentences, just the idea of how much, with young kids or older kids, how much sentences are there? Or can you just write the math work and say 20 divided by 5 equals 4? Or I guess just if you could speak to that a little bit, it would be great.
Sure. Yeah. The rubrics are really going to dictate, and those come from the bullet points, exactly what is asked of the student. So like the example the screen sheet's got here showing the 3 bullet points, explain how to determine, then give how many total hours, and then explain how you can use reasoning. So there's 2 bullet points that ask the students to explain, and there's one that just asks for a value. So that middle bullet point there is a computation component in the rubric. The other 2 are explanations. And if you look at the directions right above the box, it says enter your answer in the space. This must be an older item. It would say it would say enter your explanation, your answer, and your explanation. So it specifically spells out what you have to give. So the explanation can be in words. The explanation can be through mathematical symbols. If they explain through their work, that is sufficient as well. It's kind of up to how the rubric describes it. There's a good example. You got a reasoning component, a computation component, and then another reasoning component. And it gives you an idea of what a sample student response might look like. We have a committee that meets in June every year. We have a group of Illinois educators that we recruit, and they look over sample student responses, and they kind of give the scorers an idea of exactly what is required to earn that reasoning component. Because that first bullet point there says valid explanation for finding Maya's hiking rate. Okay, so what exactly is considered valid, right? There's some interpretation that's kind of left up for that. So, and they'll dictate what that is. So typically a sentence is enough. And it doesn't even have to be a complete sentence. We're not looking for anything grammatically correct, but just something that points out whatever mathematical piece is there. And like I said, it can be in words, and you can use it. The students can describe it or show their reasoning through their work as well. It kind of depends on the item. That last bullet point says reasoning or modeling component. And again, you can model that just through your work. So if a student can explain what they're doing mathematically, that's fine. If they can explain using words, that's fine. The only thing you want to be careful of is if it asks for an equation to be written, there's some rules around that equation. First of all, there has to be an equal sign in it, right? An equation has to have that. And there's been a lot of papers that we looked at over the years that would have the correct math, but they don't have either the word equals. They'll say 6 plus 4, and I got 10. That's not an equation. So we have to deduct a point for precision, because even though their math, we could kind of tell what they were doing. They didn't write the equation. That's what the problem asked for. A lot of times we're getting to the point where we're not writing the equations too much unless the evidence statement requires that they write an equation. We'll just say write an equation or explain your reasoning. So therefore, if they just write, like I said, 6 plus 4 and I got 10, we'll be fine. So you might want to tell your students if it asks for an equation, make sure they understand that the equation has an equal sign. They have to do that. That's just a little technicality that we're trying to kind of write the item so that we don't like how we're trying to catch kids. We really don't want to, but it ends up that we kind of are inadvertently. So we're trying to make it so that's not the case. But if they come across an item that asks for an equation, that's something that you might want to make sure you point out to them.
All right. Adam, do you have another one there?
No, I think that was the main one that didn't get answered. Some people are
Okay.
asking about the PD section, where to find that. Again, you mentioned we could watch a video or two. I believe it was on the main IAR page under the update. As I said, update January 2026.
Yes. So if you want to watch, again, a lot of those don't have, I will say, there's not a lot there yet. If you go to the main IAR webpage, it's going to be, so you have the IAR webpage. Right on that IAR webpage, you're going to go to where it says 2026 IAR trainings and resources. And where it says create an account, click on that create account.
Right. And I think the main blue heading would be, it says update January 2026. If you're looking for that, that's where you would go in that blue header. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I think that's it.
Okay. Because I want to make sure we address questions that people have. Feel free to unmute at this time. Wow.
Hi, yes, I have a question. Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So it's in regards to what Anne had posted. We received a report from last year with like the standard, the performance, the item aligned, and then descriptor. So, for example, we had like 6 EEA2C. We said there was a 25% under our performance and item aligned was 6. Does that mean there were 6 questions aligned to that standard and only 17% of our students got it correct, or 25%? Like, we got this report and we're not sure what it means. And we've reached out to ISBE and nobody's really been able to give us like a true like explanation behind it.
Right. So you're talking about reporting, not my wheelhouse. That would be Victoria Henderson. So if you're looking for somebody you can contact directly rather than just emailing the assessment inbox, because then you're not quite sure who's getting that. Victoria Henderson is who you want to contact. Her email is V and then Henders, HENDERS, V Henders at ISBE.net. And she's the one that's going to know. She's our coordinator. So she's going to have all the information on the reporting side. If I'm thinking what you're talking about is correct, if it says 6, I think it means that 6 of your students received an item that addressed that evidence statement. There's a wealth of evidence statements, and not every evidence statement is accounted for in every assessment. And your students get different forms.
I definitely think there could be a whole nother PD on what do we do with the information once we come, because that's a whole nother, yeah, definitely. And I know Heather's expertise is the actual IAR. And so I'm finding out there's ISBE people that are in charge of all kinds of different things. So I'm really happy to know certain people. And now I'm excited to know about Victoria. So I'll be sharing sharing Victoria's email as well. And I'll be probably reaching out to her. But I want to keep us all on time. And again, I just want to thank ISBE for all the resources that there are available. As we know, there's never enough resources, though. And so we want to use what we have and try to prepare our students. Again, we're not teaching to the test, but we got to know what the test looks like, and we got to know how the wording, and so that students are familiar. Thanks so much, Heather, for being here and answering questions. Laura, I don't think Laura's here, but she also helped. Adam, thank you so much for being here. Illinois Council of Teachers of Mathematics is a great organization, and I would encourage you to consider joining or attending a future presentation that we have. ICTM is a great professional organization to be part of and to be a leader of. And I would encourage you to take a look at that website of what we have to offer, information there. There are scholarships for students, there are awards for teachers, there are resources. And so I would encourage you to join us again, or really just join us as an organization. So again, thank you so much for attending.